They thought she was the help. They thought she was just there to pour the coffee, hang up the wet coats, and fade into the wallpaper. For 7 years, the wealthy and ruthless Hawthorne family looked right through Claire Bennet as if she were made of glass. But on the stormy Tuesday morning of Silas Hawthorne's will, reading the Invisible Woman was about to become the most dangerous person in the room. When the lawyer finally spoke her name, the silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of a billion-dollar empire crumbling. You might think you know how this ends, but trust me, you don't. Here is the true story of how the quietest person in the room walked away with everything. The rain battered against the leaded windows of Blackwood Manor, a relentless, drowning drumbeat that matched the mood inside the library. It was a cold Tuesday in November, the kind of day that seemed designed for funerals and bad news. Claire Bennet stood in the corner, her hands clasped tightly in front of her modest grey skirt. She adjusted her glasses, trying to make herself as small as possible. It was a skill she had perfected over the last 7 years as Silas Hawthorne's personal archivist, and in his final months, his primary caretaker. Today, however, the library felt different. It didn't smell of old paper and Silas's pipe tobacco anymore. It smelled of expensive perfume, wet wool, and aggressive entitlement. The vultures had arrived. Richard Hawthorne, the eldest, paced the Persian rug, checking his vintage Patek Philippe watch every 30 seconds. He was a man of 50 who looked 60, his face perpetually flushed with the stress of managing and mismanaging the family's shipping logistics empire. "Where is Sterling?" Richard barked, turning to no one in particular. He said 10 o'clock. "It is 10:15. My time is billable, unlike some people in this room." He shot a withering look at his younger brother, Preston. Preston was sprawled on a leather Chesterfield sofa, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. At 32, Preston had never worked a day in his life, unless you counted influencer and professional poker player as careers. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than Claire's annual salary, yet he had forgotten to wear a tie. "Relax, Richie," Preston drawled, not looking up. "The old man is dead. He's not going to fire you for being late to his own will reading. Besides, Sterling is probably just polishing his reading glasses. You know how dramatic lawyers get." "This isn't a joke, Preston," hissed Victoria St. James, the middle child. She was standing by the fireplace, warming her hands. Victoria was the picture of Fifth Avenue elegance, perfect blowout Chanel suit diamonds that were tasteful yet massive. She was currently going through a very public, very expensive divorce, and everyone in the room knew she was desperate for a cash injection. And don't call Dad the old man. Have some respect. "Respect?" Preston scoffed. "Vicky, you haven't visited him since Christmas of 2019. Don't play the grieving daughter now. We all know why we're here. The portfolio, the Hamptons estate, the liquid cash." "I was busy," Victoria snapped. "I have children, Preston. Actual responsibilities. Unlike you." Claire took a step forward, holding a silver tray. "Would anyone like more coffee? Or perhaps some water?" The 3 siblings stopped arguing for a split second. They looked at Claire with identical expressions of vague annoyance, as if a lamp had suddenly started speaking. "No," Richard grunted, turning his back on her. "Actually," Victoria said, looking Claire up and down with critical eyes, "this coffee is cold. Make a fresh pot, and use the Jamaican Blue Mountain beans, not this swill." "Of course, Mrs. St. James," Claire said softly, and Claire Preston added, finally looking up from his phone with a smirk, "Put some whiskey in mine. It's going to be a long morning." Claire nodded and retreated to the heavy oak doors. They didn't even know her last name. To them she was just Claire, a fixture of the house less important than the antique globe in the corner. They didn't know that for the last 3 years, she was the one who held Silas's hand when the tremors got bad. She was the one who read him the stock reports when his eyesight failed. She was the one who listened to his regrets at 3 a.m. when the morphine wore off and the ghosts came out. They thought she was a servant. They had no idea she was the witness. As Claire pushed the door open, she nearly collided with a tall, imposing figure. Arthur Sterling, Silas's attorney for 40 years. He was a man made of sharp angles and sharper intellect, clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. He looked at Claire. Unlike the Hawthorns, he actually saw her. His eyes, usually cold and professional, softened for a fraction of a second. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. "Miss Bennet." Sterling said, his voice a deep baritone. "Please stay. You'll need to hear this." Richard spun around. "Excuse me, Arthur, this is a private family matter. The staff doesn't need to be present for the reading of the will." Sterling walked past Richard, placing his briefcase on the massive mahogany desk that had once been Silas's throne. He didn't sit. He stood behind it, towering over the room. "The terms of the will are explicit, Richard," Sterling said, snapping the latches of his briefcase open. The sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. "All parties named in the document must be present. That includes Miss Bennet." A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Named Dad left the archivist something. What a few old books." A severance check. "Maybe he left her the cat," Preston snickered. "Sit down," Sterling commanded. It wasn't a request. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Claire's arms stand up. She moved to a small wooden chair in the far back corner, away from the plush leather seats the family occupied. Sterling put on his reading glasses. He pulled out a single thick envelope, sealed with red wax. He held it up. "Silas Hawthorne was a complicated man," Sterling began. "He built Hawthorne Industries from a single garage in Detroit into a global conglomerate. He was ruthless, brilliant, and, as you all know, incredibly demanding." "We know who he was, Arthur," Richard said, impatiently tapping his foot. "Can we skip the eulogy and get to the assets? I have a board meeting at 2. Sterling looked at Richard over the rim of his glasses. "The will," he said icily, "begins with a personal statement from the deceased. I am instructed to read it in its entirety before any assets are discussed. If anyone interrupts, they forfeit their share. Is that understood?" Richard's mouth snapped shut. Victoria crossed her legs nervously. Preston sat up straight, putting his phone in his pocket. Sterling broke the wax seal. The crackling sound was the only noise in the room. He unfolded the parchment. "I, Silas Edward Hawthorne, being of sound mind and body, though my children would argue the former, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Sterling paused, looking at each of the children. "To my children, I leave you exactly what you deserve. But before we get to the numbers, we must address the truth. For years you have waited for this day. I have watched you. I have watched you circle me like sharks, sensing blood in the water. You think you are here to inherit an empire, but you cannot inherit what you do not understand." Claire watched the siblings. Richard's face was turning purple. Victoria was picking at her fingernails. Preston was staring at the floor. "Part 1, Sterling read. "The specific bequests." The tension in the library was so thick it felt like it could choke you. The rain had intensified, lashing against the glass, as if trying to break in. "To my eldest son, Richard," Sterling read. Richard leaned forward, his eyes greedy. "You always wanted the seat at the head of the table. You wanted the power. But you never understood that power requires sacrifice. You treated the company like your personal piggy bank, and my employees like cattle. Sterling paused, flipping a page. I leave you my collection of vintage cufflinks, specifically the ones I wore on the day I fired you from the board of directors in 1998, only to hire you back out of pity 3 months later. I also leave you the sum of $500,000. Richard froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of grey. 500,000. Richard stammered, his voice cracked. That's a joke. That doesn't even cover my mortgage for a year. The company is worth billions. I'm the CEO. Acting CEO, Sterling corrected smoothly. And the will is quite specific. The cash is conditional on you resigning from the board immediately. If you refuse, the money goes to charity. This is insanity, Richard roared, standing up. He was senile. I'll contest this. I'll burn this whole estate to the ground. Sit down, Richard, Victoria hissed, though her own hands were trembling. Let him finish. Maybe the rest is divided differently. Richard slumped back into his chair, looking like he'd been punched in the gut. To my daughter Victoria, Sterling continued. Victoria straightened up, flashing a nervous, practiced smile. Vicky, Sterling read using Silas's voice. My beautiful status-obsessed butterfly. You spent 40 years chasing approval from people who despise you. You married a man for his title, divorced him for his money, and ignored your own children to attend galas for causes you can't even spell. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of humiliation. I leave you the family cottage in Maine. Victoria blinked. The cottage in Bar Harbor. She let out a breath of relief. Well, that's something. It's worth a few million, at least. Wait, Sterling said. I leave you the cottage in Maine on the condition that you live there alone for 6 consecutive months. No staff, no parties. Just you and the silence. If you fail to complete this residency, the property will be seized by the state. Victoria looked horrified. Live there alone. I can't cook. I can't clean. That place is a drafty old shack. It's punishment, Arthur. It's cruel. It's an opportunity for introspection, Sterling said dryly. Finally, he turned to Preston. And to Preston, Sterling read. My youngest, the dreamer, the gambler. Preston laughed nervously. Okay, hit me. What did I get? A deck of cards. To Preston, I leave the cancellation of all your current debts. Preston's eyes widened. Wait, seriously. All of them. Even the Vegas thing. All outstanding debts up to the date of my death are paid in full. Sterling confirmed. Approximately $3.4 million. Yes. Preston pumped his fist. I knew the old man loved me best. Clean slate baby. However, Sterling raised a finger. I leave you 0 liquid assets, no trust fund, no allowance. The tap is turned off, Preston. You are debt-free, but you are also broke. From this moment forward, you must earn your own living. Preston's smile vanished. What? How am I supposed to live? I don't have a job. I believe McDonald's is hiring, Sterling said deadpan. The room descended into chaos. The 3 heirs were shouting over each other, hurling insults at the dead man and the lawyer. Richard was threatening legal action. Victoria was sobbing about her social standing. Preston was staring at his hands in disbelief. Claire sat silently in the corner. She felt a strange mixture of pity and vindication. Silas had told her he was going to teach them a lesson, but she hadn't realized it would be this brutal. Silence. Sterling slammed his hand on the desk. The room went quiet again. We are not finished, Sterling said. "Those were the minor bequests. We have not yet discussed the bulk of the estate, the Hawthorne portfolio, the patents, the real estate holdings in London, Tokyo, and New York, the controlling interest in Hawthorne Industries. Total estimated value $4.2 billion. The siblings instantly stopped crying and shouting. Their heads snapped towards Sterling like sunflowers turning to the sun. The greed was back, sharper than ever. "Who gets it?" Richard demanded, breathless. "If he didn't give it to us, who?" Silas felt that the family fortune should go to someone who understood the value of loyalty. Sterling said slowly. Someone who was there when the cameras weren't rolling. Someone who knew his heart, not just his bank account. Sterling looked up from the document. His eyes bypassed Richard. They bypassed Victoria. They bypassed Preston. They landed directly on the woman in the grey skirt in the corner. "Claire," Sterling said softly. "Please come to the front of the room." The siblings turned slowly, their necks creaking with tension. They looked at Claire Bennett, the woman they had asked to fetch coffee 10 minutes ago. "What?" Victoria whispered. "Her. This must be a joke," Richard spat. "She's the maid. Archivist." Claire corrected her voice, trembling slightly as she stood up. She walked toward the desk, her legs feeling like lead. She could feel their hate radiating off them like heat from a fire. "The remainder of the estate," Sterling read, "including all assets, properties, and controlling interests, is to be placed into a blind trust." He paused for effect. "The sole executor and beneficiary of this trust is Miss Claire Bennett." The explosion of noise that followed was deafening. Richard actually lunged toward the desk, but Sterling stepped back. "This is fraud," Richard screamed, veins bulging in his neck. "She manipulated him. She's a gold digger." She drugged him and forced him to sign this. "I assure you, Richard," Sterling said calmly, "I videotaped the signing myself. Silas was in perfect health and sound mind, and he anticipated this reaction." "I'll sue you into oblivion," Victoria shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Claire. "You little witch, you think you can steal our birthright?" Claire shrank back, terrified. She had known Silas was leaving her something, perhaps enough to retire or start a small bookstore. She had never imagined this. "Wait," Sterling said, cutting through the noise. "There is a caveat." The siblings froze. A caveat. A loophole. Hope. "The inheritance is not automatic," Sterling explained. Silas established a test, a final condition. He pulled a small silver key from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "Claire," Sterling said, looking at her intently. "And the Hawthorne children." Silas left one final puzzle. The everything clause depends on a single item hidden somewhere on this estate. Whoever finds the heart of the house by midnight tomorrow inherits the control of the trust. If no one finds it, the entire fortune is liquidated and donated to the Cat Fanciers Association. "The heart of the house?" Preston asked. "What the hell is that?" "He didn't say," Sterling replied, "but he did leave a clue." Sterling reached into the briefcase and pulled out a tattered leather-bound journal. It was Silas's private diary, the one Claire had seen him writing in for years, but was never allowed to touch. "The clue," Sterling read, "is written on the last page. But here is the twist. The diary is locked. And the key," he pointed to the silver key on the desk, "is right here. But only one person is allowed to hold the diary. And only one person is allowed to hold the key. You must work together, or you all lose." Sterling looked at Claire. "Claire, Silas entrusted you with the key." He looked at Richard. "Richard, as the eldest, you get the diary." Sterling checked his watch. "It is now 11 a.m. You have 37 hours. I suggest you stop screaming and start solving. Because right now, the richest person in this room is the cat." The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Arthur Sterling, leaving a silence in the library, so profound it felt physical. The storm outside had paused, as if the very weather was holding its breath to see who would draw first blood. For a long moment, nobody moved. The three Hawthorne siblings stood in a triangle around the mahogany desk, their eyes locked on the small silver key resting near Claire's hand. It was a simple object, tarnished, unassuming, yet it was currently the most valuable item in the state of New York. Richard was the first to break the tableau. He adjusted his tie, a predatory smile stretching thin across his face. He didn't look at Claire. He looked at the key. "Well," Richard said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly reasonable tone. "This is a farce, obviously. Arthur has clearly lost his mind. But we are pragmatic people, aren't we?" He took a step toward the desk. "Claire, my dear, give me the key. I'll open the book, we'll find this silly trinket, and then we can discuss a severance package for you. I'm thinking $50,000. Cash. Tonight." Claire's hand hovered over the key. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. $50,000 was life-changing money for her. It could pay off her student loans. It could fix her mother's roof. "Make it 100, Victoria interjected, stepping closer. She reeked of expensive gin and desperation. "Give him the key. Claire and I'll write you a check right now. You don't want this trouble. You don't want to be involved with lawyers and courts. We can bury you in legal fees for the next 20 years. You know that, right? Don't listen to them, Claire," Preston said, leaning against the bookshelf. He looked bored, but his eyes were darting around the room, calculating. "Richie doesn't have 50 grand liquid, and Vicky's checks bounce higher than a rubber ball. Stick with the game. It's more fun." "Shut up, Preston," Richard snapped. He turned back to Claire, his face darkening. The reasonable mask slipped. "Give me the damn key, you little thief. You have 5 seconds before I call security and have you thrown out for trespassing." I can't," Claire stammered. "You can and you will," Richard growled. He lunged. It was a clumsy move born of rage and entitlement. He reached across the desk, his meaty hand grasping for the silver key. But Claire was faster, not because she was athletic, but because she knew this desk. She had polished it every Tuesday for 7 years. She knew exactly where the lip of the drawer snagged. As Richard lunged, Claire snatched the key and stepped back, her hip bumping the heavy leather chair. "No," Claire shouted. Her voice was louder than she intended, surprising even herself. Richard stumbled against the desk, his face turning a dangerous shade of plum. "You dare, mister," Sterling said. "We have to work together." Claire said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She clutched the key to her chest. "If you take it by force, or if I refuse to help, the trust is void. The money goes to the cats. Do you want that, Richard? Do you want your legacy to be a shelter for stray tabbies?" Richard froze, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked ready to strike her, but the logic pierced through his anger. He needed the money. He needed it desperately. "Fine," Richard spat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the leather-bound diary. He slammed it onto the desk. "You want to play? Let's play. Unlock the book." Claire approached cautiously, keeping the desk between herself and the eldest Hawthorne. She felt like a lion tamer walking into a cage with a whip made of dental floss. She inserted the silver key into the small brass lock on the diary's cover. Click. The sound was satisfyingly sharp. Richard immediately snatched the book back, flipping it open. "Let's see," he muttered, scanning the pages. "Ramblings? Stock prices? Complaints about the cook? Ah, here, the last entry." He smoothed the page down. Victoria and Preston crowded around him. Claire stood on her toes, trying to see. "Read it out loud," Preston said. We're all in this, remember." Richard sighed dramatically and began to read Silas's shaky handwriting. "To my ungrateful brood, and the one person who actually listened. You seek the heart of the house. You think it is the safe in the wall or the deed to the land. You are wrong. The heart is where the family history breathes, yet has no lungs. It is where I captured the light, but left you all in the dark. Go to the place where 3 generations of Hawthorns stare down in judgment, but only one looks away in shame." Richard looked up, frowning. What the hell does that mean? Where history breathes but has no lungs? "It's a riddle," Victoria said, rolling her eyes. Dad always loved his stupid riddles. Where history breathes. Maybe the library, because of the books. "No," Preston said. "Books don't breathe. It's the wine cellar. Wine breathes." "You would think that?" Victoria scoffed. "Wait," Claire said softly. The 3 heads turned to her. "The second part," Claire said. "Where I captured the light." Silas was an amateur photographer in his 20s. He talked about it sometimes. He called photography capturing light. So he took photos everywhere. Richard dismissed her. And the last part, Claire continued ignoring him. 3 generations stare down in judgment. It's the portrait gallery. In the East Wing. The portrait gallery. Victoria frowned. "Nobody goes in there. It's freezing. There are paintings of your grandfather, your father, and you 3. Claire said. 3 generations. Richard narrowed his eyes. And the part about one looks away in shame? Claire hesitated. She knew exactly what that meant. She knew the story behind the portrait of Silas's sister, the one who was disowned in the 70s. But she also knew something else, something about Richard's portrait. "We have to go there to find out," Claire said. Richard stared at her for a long moment, assessing. Then he snapped the book shut and tucked it under his arm. "Fine, to the East Wing. But if you're wasting my time, Bennett, you'll wish you had walked out of here with nothing." The East Wing of Blackwood Manor had been closed off for nearly a decade to save on heating costs. As the group walked down the long, drafty corridor, their breath misted in the air. The storm outside had knocked out the power in this section of the house, so they navigated by the flashlights on Preston and Victoria's iPhones. The beams of light cut through the dust motes, creating dancing shadows that looked like spectres reaching out from the walls. "God, it stinks in here," Victoria complained, holding a handkerchief to her nose. "Like mold and dead things." "It's just damp," Claire said, walking at the front. She knew the house better than the people who grew up in it. She knew which floorboards creaked the third one from the left, and which windows rattled in the wind. They reached the double doors of the portrait gallery. Richard pushed them open with a groan of rusty hinges. The room was vast, a long hall, lined with oil paintings in heavy gold frames. The flashlight swept across the faces of dead Hawthorns, stern men with mutton chops, women in stiff corsets, all looking down with the same imperious sneer that Richard wore. "Okay," Preston said, sweeping his light around. 3 generations. Where are we looking?" The riddle said only one looks away in shame. Claire whispered. She walked past the massive portrait of Silas, painted when he was in his prime. He looked powerful, terrifying. Then she walked past the portrait of the 3 siblings as children. Richard was standing tall, hand on a globe. Victoria was holding a doll. Preston was sitting on the floor, smiling. "Here." Claire stopped. She pointed her own small flashlight, which she always carried in her cardigan pocket, at a painting in the far corner. It was smaller than the others. It was a portrait of a woman. But unlike the others who stared boldly out at the viewer, this woman's face was turned to the side, looking toward the shadows of the background. She wasn't looking at the painter. She was looking away. "That's Aunt Clara," Richard said, his voice unusually quiet. Dad hated that painting. He tried to burn it once. "Why?" Preston asked. "I don't remember her." "Because she ran away," Victoria whispered. "She fell in love with a jazz musician in New Orleans and left the family fortune behind. Dad said she brought shame on the name." "Only one looks away in shame," Claire repeated. "This has to be it." She stepped closer to the painting. "Silas told me once that Clara was the only one who was actually free. He envied her." "He did not," Richard snapped. "He despised weakness." "He despised traps," Claire corrected gently. "And he felt trapped by this house. Maybe that's why he left the clue here." She reached out and touched the gilded frame. It was cold and covered in a thick layer of dust. She ran her fingers along the bottom edge. Nothing. She felt along the side. "Move over." Richard shoved her aside. "You're not looking properly." He grabbed the frame with both hands and yanked. Click. The painting didn't come off the wall. Instead, it swung outward on a hidden hinge. "Whoa," Preston breathed. Behind the painting was a small wall safe. It looked old, made of heavy iron with a mechanical dial. "A safe," Victoria said, her eyes lighting up. "The money is in there, or diamonds. It has to be. It's a combination lock," Richard noted, squinting at the dial. 4 numbers. "Try his birthday," Victoria suggested. "October 14th, 10:14. Richard spun the dial. 10:14. He tugged the handle. "Locked. Try the year the company was founded," Preston offered. 1952. Richard tried it. 1952. The handle didn't budge. "Damn it!" Richard kicked the wall. "We don't have time for this." Claire watched them panic. She looked at the painting of Aunt Clara again, the woman looking away in shame. She wasn't just looking away, she was looking at something specific in the painting's background. Claire squinted. In the painted background, there was a clock on a mantelpiece. The hands on the clock were frozen at a specific time. "It's not a date," Claire said. "It's a time." "What?" Richard turned to her. "Look at the painting," Claire pointed. "The clock behind her. What time is it?" Richard shined his light on the canvas. "Looks like 3:25. 03:25, Claire said. Richard hesitated, then turned back to the safe. He spun the dial. 0, 3, 2, 5. Clunk. The heavy iron door popped open. "Yes," Victoria cheered. Richard ripped the door open. He reached inside, his hand trembling with greed, but his expression instantly changed from triumph to confusion. He pulled out a single thin file folder. "That's it?" Preston asked. "Paper." "There's something else," Richard said. He reached back in and pulled out a small velvet box. "Jewelry." Victoria gasped. "Give it to me." "Wait," Richard ordered. He opened the file first. He scanned the first page and his face went white, even whiter than it had been at the will reading. "What is it?" Claire asked. Richard slammed the folder shut, clutching it to his chest. He looked at his siblings, then at Claire with a look of pure terror. "Nothing," Richard lied. His voice was high and tight. "Just old receipts. Useless." "You're a terrible liar, Richie," Preston said, stepping closer. "What's in the folder?" I said it's nothing. Richard backed away. The real clue must be in the box." He tossed the velvet box to Victoria to distract them. She caught it and flipped it open. "It's a chess piece," she said, disappointed. Inside the velvet box sat a single white queen carved from ivory. It was exquisite, but it certainly wasn't $1 billion. A chess piece? Preston asked. That's the heart of the house. No, Claire said, staring at Richard. She saw the way his hands were shaking around that folder. It's the next clue. Silas played chess every Sunday. But Richard, what is in that folder? We move on, Richard said, aggressively shoving the folder into his inner jacket pocket. We have the chess piece. Where was the chess set? The library. The game room. Richard Sterling's voice echoed in Claire's memory. He built the empire on secrets. The game room, Claire said slowly, her eyes not leaving Richard's pocket. But I think we found more than just a chess piece, didn't we? Drop it, Bennett, Richard hissed, leaning in close to her face. His breath smelled of coffee and fear. If you want that money, you'll focus on the game. Some doors are better left closed. Actually, Preston said, his voice surprisingly cold. He had moved silently in the dark and was now standing right behind Richard. He snatched the folder from his brother's pocket, with a sleight of hand he must have learned at the poker tables. Hey! Richard shouted. Preston danced back, flipping the folder open. He shined his flashlight on the document. Let's see what Richie is hiding, Preston read. He paused. He looked up, his jaw dropping. Oh, Preston whispered. Oh, wow. Dad didn't just leave a will. He left a confession. Preston, give that back. Richard lunged, but Preston sidestepped. It says here, Preston read a wicked grin spreading across his face, that in 1998, a certain Richard Hawthorne authorized the illegal dumping of chemical waste in the St. Lawrence River to save $3 million, and that Silas covered it up to save the company stock. Victoria gasped. Richard, that's a felony. It was a business decision, Richard screamed. I did it for the family. Silas kept the proof, Claire realized. He kept it in the safe, just in case. Just in case you tried to take over before he was dead, Preston finished. Man, he really hated you. The police, Claire said. If that gets out, I go to jail, Richard whispered. He looked at them, a trapped animal. And the company stock tanks. The inheritance becomes worthless. If you turn me in, you lose everything too. He looked at Claire. So, Miss Bennett, what's it going to be, justice or the billions? The silence in the portrait gallery was broken only by the sound of rain hammering against the roof, echoing the pounding in Claire's ears. The folder in Preston's hand, the one containing proof of Richard's environmental crimes, felt like a grenade with the pin pulled out. Justice or the billions? Richard had asked. Claire looked at the desperate man in front of her. She thought about the river he had polluted. She thought about the people who lived there. Then she looked at the folder and back to the chess piece in Victoria's hand. We find the heart of the house. First, Claire said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. We secure the inheritance. Then we decide what to do with Richard. Smart girl. Preston grinned, tucking the incriminating folder into the back of his waistband. Insurance. I like it. Keep Richie on a leash. Richard looked like he wanted to vomit, but he nodded. He had bought himself time. Fine. The game room. Let's get this over with. They moved quickly through the darkened corridors, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The game room was on the first floor, a masculine sanctuary of mahogany green felt, and the smell of stale cigars. In the center of the room sat the antique chess table. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and ebony. The pieces were already set up, frozen in the middle of a game. He left a game in progress, Preston noted, shining his light on the board. He never left a game unfinished. It's not just any game, Claire whispered, stepping closer. She recognized the position of the pieces instantly. This is the game he played against Arthur Sterling 3 days before he died. He made me record the moves in his journal. Who cares? Victoria snapped, shivering in her damp coat. Where does the white queen go? It's a puzzle, Claire explained, studying the board. White to move, mate in 3. If we place the queen on the correct square, it finishes the game. Just put it on the board, Richard barked. If we put it on the wrong square, nothing happens, Claire warned. Or worse, it locks. Silas rigged this table himself. He loved mechanical traps. She looked at the board. The black king was cornered. The white knight was covering the escape squares. She held out her hand to Victoria. Give me the queen. Victoria hesitated, then dropped the ivory piece into Claire's palm. Claire took a deep breath. She remembered Silas's trembling hand moving the pieces. She remembered his chuckle when he trapped Sterling. Checkmate is not about destruction, Claire. It's about removing options until only one remains. She lowered the queen onto the board, sliding it to the square marked H7. Click. A heavy mechanical thud resonated from inside the table. Then the sound of gears grinding. The drawer on the side of the table, which had been sealed shut for years, popped open smoothly. Jackpot, Preston whispered. They crowded around. Inside the drawer, resting on red velvet, was not money, and not the heart of the house. It was a single dried pressed flower, an orchid black and purple encased in glass, and underneath it a small cassette tape. A flower, Richard groaned. Are you kidding me? We're looking for a fortune, and he's leaving us botany class. It's a black orchid, Victoria said, her voice suddenly trembling. She stared at the flower as if it were a poisonous snake. They don't grow here. They're extremely rare. Dad imported them for the conservatory. The conservatory, Claire said. That's the next location. Wait, Preston said. He picked up the cassette tape. It had a label written in Silas's handwriting, Play Me. There was an old cassette player on the shelf behind the bar. Preston walked over, blew the dust off it, and inserted the tape. He pressed play. Silas's voice crackled into the room, sounding stronger than he had in his final days. Congratulations, you solved the chess problem. That requires logic, but the next step requires honesty. We are going to the conservatory, my beautiful glass garden. Victoria, do you remember the conservatory? Victoria went pale. She backed away from the speaker. Turn it off. You spent a lot of time there in 2018. Silas's voice continued. When you were chairman of the Hawthorne Hope Charity Gala, you told everyone the gala raised $4 million for the orphanage. But the books never quite balanced, did they? Vicky. Turn it off, Victoria screamed, lunging for the player. Preston blocked her path, a cruel smile playing on his lips. No, I want to hear this. The orchid in the drawer. Silas said, cost $10,000. You bought 50 of them for the gala, or so the invoice said. But there were no orchids at the party, were there? Just like there was no donation to the orphanage. The tape ended with a sharp click. The room fell silent again. Richard and Preston turned to look at their sister. Victoria was trembling, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. You stole from the charity, Richard asked, his voice low. The family charity. I had debts, Victoria sobbed. The divorce, the lawyers. I needed the liquidity. I was going to pay it back. You embezzled $4 million. Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. God, we're a bunch of crooks. Richie the polluter and Vicky the thief. Where is the proof? Richard demanded, suddenly the investigator. Silas wouldn't just say it. He kept proof. The conservatory, Claire said softly. The roots run deep. Victoria looked at Claire with pure hatred. If we go in there, if you find whatever he hid, I'm ruined. I'll go to prison. We're all going to prison if we don't finish this, Richard said, grabbing Victoria's arm. We're in this together now, mutually assured destruction. Let's go. The conservatory was a massive glass structure attached to the south side of the manor. Inside, the air was hot, humid, and thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting vegetation. The storm outside lashed against the glass roof, illuminated by flashes of lightning that turned the jungle of plants into terrifying silhouettes. I hate this place, Victoria whimpered, her heels sinking into the mulch path. It's suffocating. Start looking, Richard ordered. He said roots. Check the planters. They spread out. Claire walked slowly down the central aisle, surrounded by towering ferns and creeping vines. She felt like an intruder in a primitive world. Silas had loved this place. He called it his controlled chaos. She thought about the clue. Roots. The siblings were tearing up the flower beds, overturning pots, destroying the delicate ecosystem Silas had built. They were destroying the beauty to find the dirt. It was a perfect metaphor for their lives. Found something, Preston shouted from the back. He was standing near a massive ancient fig tree in the center of the dome. He was pointing his flashlight at the base of the tree. There, half buried in the soil between the massive roots, was a metal handle. Dig, Richard commanded. Preston and Richard got on their knees, heedless of their expensive suits, and clawed at the wet earth. Within minutes, they pulled up a rusted metal box. This is it, Richard panted. The heart. He smashed the lock with a nearby rock. The box sprang open. Inside, wrapped in plastic to protect it from the damp, was a thick ledger. And resting on top of it was a small golden locket. Victoria let out a sob when she saw the ledger. That's it. The double books, the real accounting for the charity. Richard picked up the ledger. He didn't even open it. He just looked at Victoria. Well, sis, looks like Preston has my file and I have yours. Now, we're even. What about the locket? Claire asked. She reached into the box and picked it up. It was a simple gold heart on a chain. That's Mum's, Preston said, his voice dropping. She wore that every day until she died. Claire opened the locket. Inside there was no picture, just a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was a code, a series of numbers, 38, 12, 99. And below the numbers, a single word. Garage. The garage. Preston frowned. What's in the garage? Just the old cars. Not just cars, Richard said, a dawning realization on his face. The Phantom. The Rolls-Royce. Victoria wiped her eyes. He never drove that thing. He fixed it up, Claire corrected. For years. He spent every Sunday night in the garage working on the 1935 Phantom. He said it was the only thing in the world that didn't talk back to him. So the heart of the house is a car? Preston asked. That makes no sense. The car isn't the heart, Claire said, looking at the code. The car is the container, the trunk, the glove box, the engine. Then let's go, Richard said, clutching Victoria's incriminating ledger to his chest. We're running out of time. Sterling said midnight tomorrow. It's already 4 a.m. Wait, Preston said. He was standing very still, looking at the dark glass of the conservatory walls. What? Richard snapped. Do you hear that? Preston whispered. They fell silent. Over the sound of the rain and the wind, there was another sound, a low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Is that a helicopter? Victoria asked. No. Claire said, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She recognized the sound. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the vents. It's the generator, the backup generator. "So the power is out," Richard said. "The generator for the conservatory isn't for lights," Claire said, backing away. "It's for the climate control, specifically the ventilation." Suddenly a hiss echoed through the glass room. White gas began to spray from nozzles hidden in the foliage. "What is that?" Victoria screamed. "Pesticide," Claire realized, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Silas had an automated system installed. It runs every Tuesday at 4 a.m. But it's supposed to be manual override. "The door," Richard yelled. "Run!" He scrambled toward the entrance, but the heavy glass door slammed shut with a mechanical clunk. An electronic lock engaged. Red lights started flashing. System engaged. Decontamination in progress. The white mist was filling the room rapidly. It smelled sharp, chemical, and deadly. "He locked us in!" Preston shouted, pounding on the glass. "The old lunatic rigged the room to gas us. We can't breathe this." Victoria coughed, panic rising in her voice. "It's poison. The windows." Richard grabbed a heavy clay pot and hurled it at the wall. The pot shattered, but the reinforced glass didn't even crack. "It's impact-resistant polycarbonate." Claire dropped to the ground, where the air was clearer. She looked at the keypad by the door. It was lit up, waiting for a code. "The code!" Claire shouted, pointing. "The locket, 38-12-99. Richard screamed. He punched the numbers in. "Access denied." "It didn't work," Richard yelled. "Try it backwards. 99-12-38. Access denied." The gas was getting thicker. Victoria was coughing violently, sinking to her knees. Preston was dizzy, leaning against the door. "Think," Claire yelled, her own lungs burning. "It's not the garage code. It's something else. What unlocks the conservatory?" She looked at the box they had dug up. The ledger. The locket. "It's not a number," Claire wheezed. "It's a date. Think what date matters to this room." "The date it was built." Richard coughed. "No." Claire crawled toward the door. "Victoria, the date of the gala. The day you stole the money. Silas locked this room with your sin." Victoria looked up, eyes streaming. May 12th, 2018. May 12th, 18. Claire gasped. She reached up and punched the numbers into the keypad. 0, 5, 1, 2, 1, 8. The keypad turned green. System disengaged. The hiss stopped. The vents roared to life, sucking the gas out. The doors clicked open. They tumbled out into the cold rain of the courtyard, gasping for sweet, clean air. They lay on the wet grass, coughing and retching. Richard rolled over, staring up at the dark sky. He started to laugh. A manic, terrified laugh. "He tried to kill us," Richard wheezed. "He actually tried to kill us." "He knew we'd be here," Preston said, wiping slime from his mouth. "He timed it. He knew we'd find the dirt on Victoria and be too distracted to check the time." Claire sat up, shivering uncontrollably. She looked at the three siblings. They were wet, muddy, and broken. They held the evidence of each other's crimes in their hands. "He's not trying to kill you," Claire said softly. "He's stripping you. He's taking away your dignity, your secrets, and your pride. He wants you to have nothing left but the truth." She stood up, her legs shaking. "We have the code for the garage. 38-1-2-99. Let's finish this before he decides to burn the house down with us inside." The garage was a cathedral of shadows, smelling of gasoline vintage leather and the cold metallic tang of a storm. Rain hammered against the corrugated roof, drowning out the shallow breathing of the four figures, shivering in the center of the bay. Under the flickering fluorescent light, sat the 1935 Rolls-Royce Phantom, a beast of chrome and midnight black steel. 3812.99. Richard muttered, his teeth chattering. It's not a safe combination. What is it? It's the car, Claire realized, stepping toward the driver's side. She pointed through the window at the dashboard. Look at the odometer. Preston wiped the glass. It reads 38,129 miles. It's missing the decimal, Claire said, her mind racing. It needs to be 0.9, and the 12. Silas didn't just restore this car, he tuned it. She popped the heavy hood. The massive engine block lay exposed like a mechanical heart. Here, the air intake valve is set to 12, and this red pressure bolt on the block. It goes from 0 to 100. Turn it to 99, Richard commanded, panic edging his voice. We have 3 minutes until midnight. Claire gripped the cold metal valve. It groaned under her hand as she twisted it, aligning the arrow perfectly with 99. Get back, she warned. She climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The Phantom didn't just start, it roared. A deep, resonant thrumming filled the garage, vibrating through the concrete floor. As the engine hit the specific frequency caused by the pressure setting, the brick wall behind the workbench began to shudder. Sonic resonance, Preston whispered in awe. The car is the key. With a grinding shriek of stone against stone, a section of the brick wall slid backward, revealing a stark, hidden panic room. Claire killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. They entered the room slowly. There was no gold, no jewels, just a simple scarred wooden cigar box sitting on a metal desk. The heart of the house, Claire whispered. She opened the lid. Inside lay a stack of yellowed papers and a blue-ribboned legal document. Claire picked up the letter, resting on top, written in Silas's shaky hand. My dear Claire, if you are reading this, you have survived my children. The heart of the house is not money. It is the truth. Inside this box are the patent designs my father stole in 1952. Our empire was built on a lie. I spent 50 years trying to bury that sin with success. Also enclosed is a full confession to the authorities regarding the pollution, the embezzlement and the fraud, yours and mine. I leave the choice to you. Burn it and keep the lie alive, or release it and burn us all down. The inheritance is yours. The burden is yours. Dong. The grandfather clock in the main house chimed midnight, the sound faintly echoing into the garage. The garage door rolled up slowly. Standing in the rain, holding a black umbrella, was Arthur Sterling. He looked at the muddy, terrified siblings, and then at Claire. The deadline has passed, Sterling said calmly. The trust is now active. Miss Bennet, the assets are yours. Have you made your decision regarding the contents of the box? Claire looked at the Hawthorne siblings. Richard, the arrogant CEO, looked broken. Victoria, the socialite, was stripped of her glamour. Preston, the gambler, looked sober for the first time in his life. They knew she held the evidence that would send them all to prison. Richard's eyes were wide with fear. Claire, please. Claire held the files over the trash can. Then she stopped. She closed the box and tucked it firmly under her arm. I'm not burning them, Claire said, her voice turning to ice. I'm keeping them. This is my insurance. She turned to Richard. You want to run the company? Fine. You're hired, but you're going to run the environmental cleanup division. You will fix the river you poisoned. If you miss a day, I release the file. She turned to Victoria. You will run the foundation. No parties. You will work in the shelters and pay back every cent you stole. If you quit, I release the file. And you, she pointed at Preston. Accounting. You will audit every department for fraud. If you steal a single paperclip, I give your file to the mobsters you owe money to. And if we refuse, Richard whispered. Then I am the sole owner of a billion-dollar empire, and you are 3 inmates in a federal prison, Claire said. Do we have a deal? The 3 siblings nodded, heads bowed in defeat. They had lost the fortune, but kept their freedom at the cost of their pride. Good, Claire said. She walked past them toward the open rain, stopping next to Sterling. I'm not family, she said over her shoulder. I'm the landlord, and rent is due. She paused at the door, looking back at Richard one last time. Report to my office at 8 a.m. Don't be late, and Richard, bring me a coffee. Jamaican Blue Mountain, and make sure it's hot. Claire Bennett walked out into the storm, leaving the ghosts of the Hawthorne legacy behind her, finally stepping into the light. And that is how the invisible archivist brought the Hawthorne Empire to its knees, not with a sword, but with the truth. Silas Hawthorne knew that his children would never learn from a lecture, but they would learn from fear. Claire Bennett didn't just inherit a fortune that night. She inherited a purpose. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting the loudest, but the one who knows where the skeletons are buried. What would you have done in Claire's shoes? Would you have sent them to prison and taken the billions? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of twists, karma, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Oviet laimo by Transpam Kautrox de.